This Easter morning, I want to begin with a poem. This comes from one of the mystics from the 17th century, Tukaran. I don't think he was Christian. I think he was probably an Eastern tradition. But I thought it was a wonderful poem because it's Easter. It's Easter, and it's the day that we confront the one most terrible thing that we can think of, the most irreversible and the most permanent thing that we can imagine in our lives is death. And so this poem, rather humorous as it is entitled, "That Angel Talked Like a Sailor." What part of heaven did she come from? That angel talked like a sailor, and she was dressed enchantingly scant. I can't even repeat the things she said, or picture once more the shape of her voluptuous body. Though I know one thing, my fear of dying has vanished. Written by a man, of course. As the movie An Unfinished Life comes to a close, Robert Redford poses a really poignant question to Morgan Freeman's character. In the movie, Robert Redford's son had been horribly killed in an automobile accident, and he had not been able to internalize that suffering. So the entire movie was about different characters' journey through the suffering and answering the questions of death. And as the movie comes to a close, and they're panning out, and it's a beautiful scene of a Montana ranch, and without a single face on the screen, you hear the voice of Redford as he addresses Morgan Freeman, and he asks this question: do you think the dead care about our lives? Now, for us, a lifetime is 70, 80 years? Hopefully a little more. We hope we live long, and we hope we're healthy and we take care of ourselves. But I remember a number of years ago, life expectancy was around 72. That was about the age my grandfather died. And I think today, if you're a man living in our culture, you're up to about 82 or 83 years, women a few years longer. So we would say roughly that about 80 years is a lifetime. So here's a statistic. If you live to be 80 years old, in the course of what we would think of as one lifetime, over 4 billion people will die during your lifetime. 4 billion people during the 80 years that you live will pass away. Most of them without your even noticing. Death might begin to make us believe that life is a passing shadow, that nothing lasts forever, that there is no permanence in all of life. So what do we believe? What do we believe about life and death? What do our lives say about what we believe? Archaeologists continue to uncover Roman tombstones from the time of Jesus, and the most often repeated epitaph, it's used so often that there are simply 7 characters in the Roman alphabet that represent this epitaph. And it goes like this: I was not, I was, I am not, and I don't care. Now, we believe that a lifetime is a very long journey. We gather at the end of a person's life, and we use phrases and statements that indicate the same, that they have completed the journey, that they endured to the end, that it was a life well lived, and indeed it was, but in our minds, it seems like a long time. Carlo Corretto said that earthly life is but the first and very short stretch of the journey that is to be done. It is far from completing it. You see, when we compare the distance of our earthly lives to what is unknown beyond them, and we think about the rest of our journey toward God, and when we use terms that we can somehow grasp some concept of, like eternity, then it begins to dawn on us that our ceremonies at death look rather like a graduation ceremony from kindergarten. Now, what else do we believe? We believe that death is the opposite of life. By and large, most of us have decided that death and life are exact opposites. We think of other metaphors that we can use, like the darkness and the light. But in Jesus, maybe there's a new reality to be considered, that death and life are organically related to the parts of the whole. That they're, in fact, not opposites, but partners working in a recreation of reality and something new. You see, in Jesus, God can die and be unable to die at the very same time. Both things can be true in our world where we think in dualistic terms. That is so hard to get our minds wrapped around, but both things can be true. Think of it this way. For so many people, for so many years, death was the equivalent of the pit, the grave, or perhaps the word hell as it appears in the Bible over and over. And the pit or the grave or death itself, the absence of life, was simply considered to be the place of the absence of God. God is life. And so to be in a place where there is a void of all life is to be in a place where God is not. And we see a picture in Jesus becoming God and going into the place, going into the grave, into the pit. You see, it wasn't good enough for God that Jesus could be born once, born even of a virgin, born in a manger, born rejected, and grow into this wise prophet. It wasn't enough for God that Jesus could be born and that God could say Jesus will live forever because Jesus was born, but God in Christ chooses to die. It's Job's question again. How do you know what it's like to be us, Lord? Because you don't understand termination. I used to tell my high school Sunday school boys, back in the beginning of the congregational life here, when I had time to teach Sunday school, and I loved having the high school boys, and I would ask them, what can God not do? And of course, high school boys say, oh, God can do anything. And I'm like, no, that's not true. God cannot die. You cannot kill a God. Look back through the ages and through all of mythology and every religion that's ever been known to man, and gods cannot be killed. You cannot kill God. God cannot die until God clothes God's self in flesh. Until God creates in God's own body a dependency on a bloodstream, carrying life-giving oxygen through cells to organs in the body, and then God can die. The message in Jesus is clear that God chooses to endure what Job challenges God to endure. God faces with us the last great question, and the one that we are helpless and hopeless against. Jesus died, my friends. Jesus died. He didn't just stop breathing. He didn't just go and wait for 3 days and get up and run around. Jesus died. He went through what you will go through. And then we see in the Christ that it is absolutely true. God cannot, must not, and will not die. Or the way we like to say it is Jesus has the victory over death. Death is but a thin black veil. It sure doesn't feel that way, does it? You see, Easter poses a bit of a problem. Easter poses a bit of a problem for us. Because as much as we want to believe it, it's not that easy. How? How? Some people may ask us, at work or at school or at the water fountain or in our friends' circles where we are explaining ourselves, where we are making ourselves look good, intelligent, and on top of things. How? Some people may ask us in those circles, how can you believe in such a thing? Easter has become perhaps the biggest hoax in Christian life. If it weren't true, there would not be empty seats here today. If people really believed that God had resurrected someone, So when we dare to believe it, and when we dare to share that belief with someone else, they might ask, how? How with our 21st century minds can we truly believe? We may honestly even be asking ourselves, how? How, with all that we know to be true, how can I really believe it? It has, after all, been explained in a lot of different ways. We have explained the death of one thing, giving life to another, and giving birth to something brand new. You know how it looks. We end one job feeling sad and feeling anxious, only to find ourselves in a short time in a better place, working at a better job. Something had to die for something new to be created, and for us to be created new, recreated. We've even sometimes sacrificed and believed in more sacred parts of our own lives. We find ourselves reborn or recreated perhaps after we lose someone dear to us or our marriage falls apart. Life seems to go on, and it often gets better. But there is the permanence of the finality of death. No person has ever proved anything any different. It seems that death is winning. We have experienced its reality. And then there's Jesus. Either he rose or he didn't. Either it happened or it's just a big hoax. There is no neutralizing the situation. There is no neutral position on Easter. Either you believe it or you don't. And oh, how we want to believe it. How we want to believe it, but how can we? How will we answer? How? When others ask us, how can you really believe it? Perhaps we've overthought it. Perhaps we have attempted to over-explain our own faith. Now, we cannot truly believe, say in this thing or that our intelligence and our experience help shape our faith. I think a person is foolish not to believe that God is interested in our minds as well as our hearts. I like the posters that I've seen that said, I gave my heart to Jesus, but I didn't give my mind away. We can reason and use our own experience. Experience is one of the ways that John Wesley indicated God communicates to humanity. We can validate our experiences and we can use our intelligence when we are working out our issues of faith. But here on the Easter question, there is no compromise. It's too real to believe. It's too unreal to believe. And either you believe it or you don't. You know, there's another part of this is that if you believe it, then either you live it or you don't. Actually, if you believe it, you're going to live it. You're going to risk something because of it. But to say we believe it in our heads and not risk something in our lives because we think that it's reality, we live like it's reality, like death is really a thin black veil, even when we cannot see through it. We believe the promises and so we risk for it. But perhaps the best answer is this, that when people ask you, how do you believe it? Without compromising your intelligence or your experience, and without trying to defend it at all. Perhaps the best answer when someone asks, how do you possibly believe in such a thing? Perhaps the best answer is simply, I don't know. Honey, I don't know. I don't know. It does not make sense. But I just know that I believe it. That Jesus has promised this, that God in Christ has promised it, and I don't know why I allow my mind to go there, but I believe it. And if I believe it, I'm willing to be broken, and I'm willing to be available. I'm willing to speak and to live life for others, and I am not afraid to face whatever I have to give up and die to. For the Apostle Paul, it is the litmus test of Christian faith. Paul says it, you heard it today. If it's only for this life, if it's only, this is a picture of how when things end, something new is reborn. If it's only about moving on with life when things fall apart, if it's only about what God is doing here, and trust me, I believe it is about that, and it has to be about that, because it can't only be pie in the sky. But Paul says if we get too stuck in it only matters here, our faith is in vain, because Christ was resurrected. And resurrected means Christ was resurrected, not resuscitated, not brought back the way he was, but Christ came back a new creation and the first of many. And we will follow that example. One day, can you dare today to believe it? Can you see it? I left the veil on purpose today. It was so brilliant this morning, the radiance of the white cloth, the radiance of the Easter communion table waiting to be unveiled. And this will not keep us from the elements. Do you think the dead care about our lives? He asked. I love Morgan Freeman. His response to Robert Redford was, do the dead care about our lives? Yes, he said. I think they care. He said, I even think they forgive us. Hell, he said, I think it's easy for them. All thanks be to God. On this Easter day, we will not lose the battle to death. Pray with me, would you?